Welcome to the webinar. And could you move to next slide? I'm the word language specialist at Nebraska Department of Education. I'm Liu Xianquan, and you can call me Crystal. And I would like to introduce the mission of our Department of Education. It is empower educators to engage students in the authentic use of word language while standard-based instruction to fulfill a range of functions from expressing personal needs to communicating in the workplace and to establishing strategic relationship across cultures so that they may learn, earn, and live. And
Sophia, 你那个歌学的怎么样了？你学的
Next slide, please. So our co-sponsor is CLTA SIG K-12. Co-sponsors this guest speaker series. So Dr. Kang is not here, so I'm going to share their mission with you. This special interest group of K-12 classroom and methodology will create a professional platform to connect K-12 Chinese teachers from which they could update and refresh their Chinese classroom teaching skills and enrich their Chinese pedagogy and methodology. So today we're going to have Dr. Nick Ziegler to present on, oops, sorry, this is the wrong. Sorry, I made it wrong. As Apple assessment for proficiency. I'm sorry. I need to check it before. Sorry. And the next slide, we're going to share information about upcoming seminars, webinars with you as well. So Dr. Christopher Jacobs from University of Nebraska Kearney is going to present maximizing language learning success by maximizing students in the teacher flow on September 10th from 10 to 11:30. And Ms. Elia Evans is going to present on movement in the classroom on September 24th from 10 to 11:30. And Ms. Colleen Browning is going to present on interpersonal speaking and writing tasks on September 17th from 10 to 11:30. And Dr. Perez Marrero, Antonio Sergio is going to present on Show What You Know events, Pro-literacy through drama on October 1st, 10 to 11:30. And we also have Actful Teacher of the Year, Ms. Heather Switzer, to present on content-based learning in language classrooms on October 12th from 3:45 to 5:15. It's a Wednesday. And also I'm inviting all of you to present in the guest speaker series. This is a QR code. If you scan it, you will get the you will access the Google form for interest of presentation. And on the next slide, all the recordings will be posted on the web page within a week. Sometimes it takes 2 days and sometimes it takes a week. And also, next, I would like to introduce our presenter today, guest speaker today is Dr. Nick Ziegler. He is a word language coordinator at Nebraska Education Service Unit 5, where he oversees 7 Spanish teachers. He is an amazing leader. And I'm very lucky to work with him for a couple of events, leading a couple of events. And he's really very creative and very helpful. And his 7 teachers teaches 16 school districts across the state while distance learning. He's also an active leader in the world language education across the state. Also, he is their technology integration specialist, right?
It's true.
Well, you have multiple roles in the state, very active. And now, Dr. Nick Ziegler, could you please take it on?
Of course. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. I am Nick Ziegler. I am at the Educational Service Unit 5 in Beatrice, Nebraska. I'll stop the screen share for just a little bit. My background, my PhD is in world language education, teaching and learning in teacher education from the Department or the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. I studied under Dr. Moeller there with an emphasis on world language education. I have taught Spanish, German, English, and in the moment now I get to oversee an awesome group of 7 Spanish teachers teaching via distance learning, 4 of them from my offices here in Beatrice, Nebraska, and 3 of them from offices in ESU 3 in the Omaha area. We teach to 16 different school districts, mainly across rural Nebraska, where they sometimes have a difficulty finding a Spanish teacher. So that's a bit of my background. Today, though, I was asked to share a little bit more about the AAPPL Proficiency Test. This is a test that we have administered the past 2 years to our Spanish 2 and our 3-4 students. And so our programming, we offer Spanish 1, 2, and then also in our 3rd year, we offer Spanish 3-4 in collaboration with Nebraska Wesleyan University, their 10-10 and 10-20 courses in the junior year, along with their 2010, their 201 course, if you're a UNL fan, in our Spanish 5 class. And so we plan to continue to administer the AAPPL Proficiency Test. Let's dive in. I'll close out that presentation and invite you, and maybe Crystal, if you could share the link. This is the link if you would like to access it, tinyurl.com, AAPPL ESU5. That is case sensitive, with the AAPPL being large and ESU being small. This is my contact information should you desire to reach out. Today, I would like to talk, so what are we going to talk about? Let's talk about what is the AAPPL assessment of proficiency. Want to think about why would you engage your students with the AAPPL test, and think about what does it look like from a student perspective. We'll also look at the teacher perspective in terms of getting students registered to take it, as well as the results that come in. Talk a little bit about logistics for taking the test too. And then I think this is the meat of what everybody would like to know. How can I prepare students for the test? We'll try to cover those top questions in the next hour or so. So what is the AAPPL test? There are 4 tests. So first off, the AAPPL is a proficiency test that is directly tied to the actual proficiency guidelines. The test looks at the 3 modes of communication, right? Your interpretive mode of communication. We have interpretive reading tasks as well as interpretive listening tasks. It also tests the presentational mode of communication with a writing component, and then an interpersonal listening and speaking. And so that interpersonal mode of communication as well. I'll show you what that looks like in time, but let's dive deeper into what does it measure, why, and so what is the AAPPL proficiency test? It is a proficiency test that then aligns to our actual proficiency guidelines. And so remembering that we start at novice, where students are expected to be able to communicate in more of that formulaic or rote utterances. starting at novice low with more just words, moving into at novice high, being able to have some pretty limited conversation or limited production, then moving into that intermediate piece where students can create language a little bit larger. And so at the intermediate level, maybe we're also diving into some other verb tenses, not just limited to the present tense. Moving on into the advanced, where we're feeling pretty good about language. We can narrate and describe in all of those major time frames, as well as engage in some more spontaneous and communication around themes or topics that you might not have studied in great depth. The AAPPL Proficiency test gives students rankings along, so scores at the N1 through N4. So they break it further. When you look at the AAPPL Proficiency guidelines, it typically says novice, low, middle, and high. And here we're seeing N1 through N4, as well as I1 through I5, with N4 being kind of on the cusp in between that novice and intermediate level. And then the same is true at the I5, at that low advanced level, intermediate high. What do we mean by different levels of proficiency? I suspect some of us have a bit more experience with the different levels of proficiency than others. I'd love to share some work that Crystal and I led over this past summer. We met with, was it 35 or so educators across the state to look at our world language standards in the state of Nebraska and develop self-assessments of proficiency for the novice and intermediate levels. These are direct links. And so once again, if you missed the link to the presentation, there it is, tiny URL. But these are direct links to some of that work. When you open it up, then you're able to make a copy of the document to potentially use in your classrooms. And I don't desire to dive too deep into this, but I think it's important that we establish what we're talking about in relation to the different levels of proficiency. This is a self-assessment document for that novice high. And again, it's aligned to our Nebraska World Language Standards, where the first strand is communication. And then at that novice mid level, we are asking students to ask simple questions, for example, answer simple questions. That in the interpretive here, we are asking students to recognize cognates and prefixes, identify words to help you understand simple conversations, understand the difference between questions and statements and exclamations. And presentational mode of communication, that you can write about some familiar topics using high frequency vocabulary and phrases, talk about yourself and others using those familiar topics, memorized words and phrases. I'm not going to go through the entirety of the self-assessment document, but the AAPPL Proficiency Assessment focuses on student capacity for communication, those three modes of communication. The self-assessment document is organized around intended to be administered to students potentially at the front end of a course, and then again maybe in the middle, sometime around Christmas if you're in a high school setting potentially, and then potentially again at the end of the year. This is intended to be more of that course level self-assessment, asking students how comfortable are they with those expectations based on the standards and the proficiency levels. So once more, this is communication. It dives deeper then into our other strands around culture, as well as connections, communities, and finally cognition. Nebraska is one of the only states that I'm aware of that calls out cognition, and the idea being that we're asking students to self-assess their ability. We're asking students to set goals and organize priorities, reflect on learning. promoting that student self-regulated capacity. So those are documents there, and if you so desire, you have access to, I just shared, there's the novice mid, novice high, and the advanced intermediate low. I'd love to pause here for just a moment and ask you, I'm going to ask you, in your level 2 course, what proficiency level are you shooting for? What is your course goal? I'll pause for just a moment. I'm going to ask you to write that in the chat in about 10 seconds. So I'm just asking you to identify maybe novice high, intermediate low, maybe it's novice mid. But after 2 years in your program, what is your proficiency goal in your classroom? Take another 5 seconds to think potentially. Go ahead and start entering. I'd love to see. What are we shooting for in your language classrooms? Be bold, my friends, and share with us. I'll continue with stating in our program in our first year of Spanish classes, it's our goal, our proficiency goal for students, that they reach the novice mid level. In our second year, we are shooting for the novice high level. And then in our 3-4, intermediate low. And in our final, recognizing that once we think about those proficiency student level, it takes more time to reach an advanced mid, and it takes, let me say it this way, it takes longer. You see the cone goes out. There's the breadth of knowledge that students need to acquire takes more time to move from an intermediate low to an intermediate high when compared to moving from a novice high to an intermediate low, and so on and so forth. But wonderful. I'd love for you to share, what is your proficiency goal in your classrooms? Let's continue and reiterate the idea that the AAPPL test measures proficiency. We looked at the 3 modes of communication. I want to now start thinking about why would I engage my students with the AAPPL test? I think there's a couple ideas or a couple different reasons in regards to my program. These are borrowed from a webinar that I attended on the AAPPL test not so long ago. It was last year, provided. So they suggest things like recognizing students, valuing the language learning both inside and out, affirming native and heritage learners, providing employers with a method of identifying language ability, preparing students for those 21st century skills. Another in the state of Nebraska is so that students would be eligible, assuming that they test at the right levels, that students would be eligible for the seal of biliteracy. Nebraska is one of many states, the majority of states across the states, almost all of them across the United States, have established a seal of biliteracy. Let's dive just a little bit further into that. In our state of Nebraska, we offer 2 different levels of the seal of biliteracy. The gold is intended to be at that that advanced low or intermediate high level of proficiency. The silver level is more of that intermediate mid. There are a myriad of different tests that you might take to become eligible, and the AAPPL is one of them. If you click there, you're able to open up the more information about the Nebraska Seal of Biliteracy. Let's return though to our AAPPL test. So the AAPPL test, this is important, there are 2 different forms for the AAPPL test. And so forms, and effectively 2 different types of tests. One is the A form, there's an E, but I'm not going to worry about that. But there's an A form and a B form. The A form is intended more for our beginners and into intermediate levels. The B form for that intermediate reaching into advanced. So if we think in your classroom, in your context, that you may have students who would reach that gold level qualification for the seal of biliteracy, I think it's important to note you would want to order or you would want to register your students for the B form and not the A form. The A form would be sufficient if you're looking at students maybe in a level 2 class where you're not expecting them to reach into the advanced levels of proficiency. In my classes and in our classes, reminding you that we have 7 educators working with roughly 450 students across 16 different school districts in the state. I register my Spanish 2 students for the A form, and I register my dual credit or Spanish 3-4 students in their junior and senior years with us. I register them with the B form. We have had success in my program with students acquiring the seal of biliteracy. This past academic year, one of my students acquired the gold level of seal of biliteracy, and I had 2 students acquire the silver level, which is outstanding. It's exciting. So that is certainly a reason why I engage our students in the AAPPL assessment so that they would potentially be eligible to achieve or attain the seal of biliteracy. But also, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about best practices, that we acknowledge that across the content areas, not just in the state of Nebraska, but in other states as well, the big talking points seem to be around shifts in the content area standards. For example, in the science classrooms, we're shifting more toward that inquiry-based experience for the students. The same is true in social studies classrooms, where we're asking students to instead of memorize rote dates and maybe in the science classroom formulas, we're asking students to be able to apply those ideas. In the social studies classroom, to think like a historian. In the world language classrooms, the shift inside of our standards is toward that communicative based classroom. Now, we've known for a long time that communicative based practices in your classrooms are important, that we want to promote the different modes of communication. We want to include them in our instruction. We're thinking about the AAPPL test. Well, the AAPPL test is a measure of student proficiency. Let's talk about the washback effect of tests. Positive washback. So washback is the effect that a test can have on instruction. And in my context, thinking about our program, I want to be able to look at program level data to ensure that we are meeting those student needs in the different modes of communication. That would be the definition of a positive washback. Now let's think about the No Child Left Behind era and standardized testing inside of potentially, I don't know, elementary classrooms. I would argue maybe that had a negative washback effect, where we were focused on teaching to or toward the test and teaching test taking skills, for example. That's not what we're talking about when I desire. That's not the washback effect that I desire in our program, but rather to help our learners, give learners feedback, positively influence how the teachers teach, how the learners learn. We want to offer learners a chance to adequately prepare. That means that in our classrooms, we're doing things that promote acquisition of language ability in the 3 different modes. We want a test that provides feedback to enhance learner development. that is more of a formative experience. In my classrooms, and our students do not receive a grade for their results on the AAPPL test. There is no grade associated with it. So great. Our goal is that we see positive washback effect in the classroom. We collect, of course, program level data, and this is what it looks like from last year. Last year, I think we had about 200 or a bit more students take the AAPPL proficiency test. And remembering that we had roughly, I don't know, 170 or so Spanish 2 students take the test, and another somewhere around 50 or so students take the students in Spanish 3-4, the junior year, take the test. And across those students are students on at least one of those tests tested at the novice high level or the intermediate level. I had some students test at the novice mid-level as their highest proficiency level on one of the tests. I had 7% of my students test at the advanced level on one of the tests. Averaged across the test, I'm able to share with my teachers that 58% of our students tested at novice high, remembering that that's our goal. Right, our goal and across our Spanish 2 program is that we reach the novice high by the end of the year. Now we administer the AAPPL test in March because we want students to get the results back in time to apply for the seal of biliteracy should they be eligible. Let's glance here at I'm able to then break it out into the different tests that are offered. Glance at that for a moment while I refresh. So here I'm showing you our program data. I think that having access to the program data like this allows for my educators to dive deeper and engage in reflective practices around how can we get even better. For example, I see that students did best on the interpretive reading. Students did about the same on their ability for presentational writing and interpretive listening. And we struggled a little bit more with the interpersonal speaking. So that's an emphasis this year. We want to focus on some activities, some strategies that will help students better their interpersonal speaking skills. Let's continue to what does the test look like from the student perspective. So, but I guess right before that, I mean, please do use the chat. Please do use the chat. We're going through our objectives here. We've seen what is the AAPPL proficiency assessment. We've talked about why might you want to do that. Let's dive deeper into what does it look like from the student perspective. We've seen there are 4 different components, 4 different tests. I should mention you don't have to sign your students up for all 4 tests. My recollection is that, and I have it written down somewhere, but each test is around $5 per student. So if you're counting, then that's around $20 per student. As a program, my program pays for those students to take the test, but potentially in your context, that might not be true. So you might choose to only do the interpersonal speaking or the presentational writing. The interpretive tasks come as a bundle. So you can sign your students up for the interpretive only, and they'd have access to both the reading and the listening. So what do those look like? Let's look. This is the interface for the interpersonal speaking experience. Students are presented with a video of an individual talking at them. It's intended to mimic a live conversation. Students have the ability to replay that video once before it begins to record their response. There are between 15 and 20 or so prompts that students are presented with. And the difficulty level, of course, will depend on whether you ordered that Form A or the Form B. I mean, obviously, you're not supposed to coach your students through the experience, and students are wearing headphones. And so I couldn't even necessarily hear the prompts as they're being presented to the students. But on that Form A, it tended to be just like when we think about our levels of proficiency, asking questions about yourself, your family, where do you live? Tell me about your town. Simple conversation that we know and engage with in our level 1, maybe level 2 courses, novice, mid, novice, high levels of proficiency. Students are allowed to record as long as they want, and we want to encourage them to say something in response. Don't give up is important, even if you don't hear everything, right? It's an important strategy as you're listening that you can pick out a word and talk to it. Say something. Don't say nothing. Say something. That's the idea with the interpersonal component. Next up, let's glance at the presentational writing piece of the AAPPL proficiency test. There are 6 tasks students are presented with. At least now I should say this is on the AAPPL website. If you go to LTI, is Language Testing International. If you search the AAPPL test, you'll find access to a test demonstration, a demo test. On the demo test, the students had 6 tasks. This is an example where students are supposed to write an email listing school supplies that a student at your school needs. And so notice the verbiage. We're asking students to make a list, not even necessarily to give you full-on sentences, but to make a list of school supplies that students might need. You can glance at the interface here in order for students to access the different characters. They have to click on the icon, and then it drops down with the different accents that you might want. This is the presentational writing. It's not all necessarily writing an email, but we're thinking about narrative. We're thinking about descriptions of different things. In this case, we're writing an email listing school supplies. I'll share more about what kinds of prompts you might expect in a moment. Now let's glance. What does it look like from the student perspective? Here is a snapshot of the interpretive reading. I kind of like this in so much as we're incorporating some images. So students in this example have access to 6 different images, and you're supposed to read the prompts and then pull the image into the correct box. So in this example, the girls, they are twins. So the students would likely pull in the image of twins into the correct box. There are multiple choice questions as well, but I do appreciate the questions with the images. The interpretive listening is similar, but of course, instead of having our text, we have to play the audio and then pull the image to the correct space that describes, in this case, the weather. Here too, there are examples of longer text, especially with the Form B, where there are multiple choice instead of images for students to select from. What does it look like from the student perspective? Well, at the end of the test, students receive a certificate that identifies the level of proficiency that they scored at. This would be the interpretive listening. This individual scored at N3, presentational writing N4, and so on. It also, and this is something I really like, it allows for students to see different strategies. It gives you a description of the level. This is what your score means, and then also provides some direction for students as to what they might do to get better in that specific component, that specific mode of communication. So, I mean, backing up for just a moment to the idea of positive washback, one of the core ideas is that this is a formative experience for the students, and that it provides feedback, positively influences what students and how students learn. So as part of taking the proficiency test, students will understand where they are on that proficiency scale, and also they're provided with some ideas for how they might continue learning. Let's glance now at the teacher side. What does it look like from the teacher perspective? When you log into the LTI website, the Apple website, you then register your students for the test that you desire. It is, I would say, a little bit cumbersome if you have a program with 300 students you're trying to register, although they do allow you to download an Excel spreadsheet to then mass upload what you're wanting in terms of tests. When you download that form, the columns across the top include what district it is, and so it tells you if this is required information or not. And so the student ID number I found interesting. It's required, although you can make up any ID you want. It is asking you to identify by name who your students are. And so here it asks you, which form are you asking for the students to have access to? And then one thing I do like is that it gives you the option to identify some custom fields. You don't have to, like in my program, so it tells you you're supposed to identify the teacher. Well, I didn't want my teachers to be comparing against each other, and so I just entered ESU5 teacher, for example. But that's entirely up to you, how you would like. The core question comes down to, how would you like to disaggregate your data? I showed you our program data. How would you like to be able to filter your data? And maybe if you only have one classroom, it's kind of a moot point. But you're required to provide this information and able to provide more information to allow you to look at your data how you would like to look at it. This is their interface for what that data looks like, where I cut off the student names, of course, but it's telling you then the scores for the students. Another thing that I really like as the director of a program is that it tells you how they scored the student, and then also allows you to select a student to listen to how they responded, to read what they wrote. You don't get that information on the close-ended tests of interpretive listening and reading, but you do get to see how students responded. And I think that's important from a program perspective, in that I want our educators also to understand the different levels of proficiency. And so here we're able to see how they scored an I3, an intermediate mid-level, and how that differs then from an N4, that novice high or intermediate low. And when you select one of those icons, it will pull up all of the responses. So this is an example from Form B, where I'm not going to count them off the top of my head, but it provides you then with the recordings. You can play the recordings. I have an example here if you want to click on it. I find it actually mildly entertaining, and so we might as well listen to it together here. So this is a Spanish 3-4 student. I have no idea what the prompt is, but Oops, let's come back. I wonder if it will let me play. I bet I have to stop my screen share and then I have to share my sound for you to be able to hear. And so
Me gusta las madres de mis amigos. Sí.
so I find it entertaining because I have no idea what the prompt was, but this young man responds, "Me gustan las madres de mis amigos." Sí. And so that means I like the mothers of my friends. Yes. And so again, I guess my point in sharing that is that it doesn't necessarily matter that your students, when they respond to this, are directly addressing the question. Certainly that's important, don't get me wrong, but the idea is we need them to produce some language. I was proctoring this test and heard this student say this, and I was a little bit flabbergasted, to tell you the truth. But once more, I guess they liked his pronunciation, and it must have addressed the question. But in 11 seconds, they rated that as an advanced response. This is the same, actually, I think this is a different student looking at an example of what an intermediate level of presentational writing might look like versus an advanced level of proficiency for that presentational writing component. My point is, as a teacher, as a program, you're able to have access to how the students responded. And I think that's very beneficial for your program. I showed you our data, and I just want to share that's because I pulled it out of LTI's website, that's spreadsheet looking interface on their website. I don't like all that much. I put it into Google Sheets, and then I used Google Data Studio to allow me to display the data in different ways, and also to filter by, it looks like, is the district returning to our program, and did they receive, the student receive a certificate of academic excellence. We offer students two different awards at the end of the academic year, one for proficiency, and that's based off of their results, and the other for academic excellence in relation to grade point average. So those were the filters I wanted to add. If I so desired, I could have added to filter by school district. If I had entered schools, my teachers' names, I could have filtered by teacher name. But once more, I didn't want this to be viewed by my teachers as less than a formative experience. And so I did not do that. Let's get out of presentational mode so I can see what's coming next. All right, let's talk just a little bit about logistics. As you've seen, there's a speaking component. Therefore, I would strongly recommend that your students have a headset, a microphone and headphones that they're able to hear and speak without interfering with other test takers. So if students have a nice headset, we can still have them seated within 6 feet of each other, 5 feet of each other, I mean, even 3 feet of each other. And that does not interfere with the recordings. And so remembering that certified actual scorers are needing to hear the results. And of course, we don't want interference from others. I recommend that students are on a laptop. That could be a MacBook, that could be a PC laptop. Although, as I mentioned, we serve 16 different school districts across the state. I had 2 different school districts taking this test from an iPad. It is iPad compatible. I had districts taking it from a Chromebook. It is Chromebook compatible. And if you need more information on those logistics in relation to test taking, and then also to see the system check, those are the links for you right there. So I did not find, there was only one school district that needed to whitelist one of the websites, but you find those here. And when you open that up, you'll see what it's suggesting to our tech coordinators in your school districts in relation to what websites need to be accessible for the programming to work. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're to the I really want to know part. And so it's 4:30, and it looks like we've got a good amount of time, about 45 minutes, to think about how can I prepare students for the test. Let's return to that idea. So this is one of the slides that we present to our students at the beginning of the academic year. 3 core belief statements. Number 1, we believe all students can succeed. Number 2, we believe in a supportive classroom experience. Number 3, we believe in world language best practices. That means our curriculum, so I'll just state directly that our curriculum we have developed ourselves, our educators have put forth significant effort to develop our scope and sequence and also the materials for that to work. We developed our program based off of those different modes of communication. We do different cycles where, and so a cycle is a 3-day cycle. Students go through 2 days of more teacher-led learning before then on the 3rd day, there's more of a student-led experience. Students create a product for each mode of communication. We do the interpretive mode twice. So there are 2 iterations of that interpretive cycle. So roughly 6 days. The first product that we ask students to create is a grammar related product. We limit our grammar focus to 1 grammar concept per unit. So we have a grammar notebook that we've developed with the explanation our own. That's 1 product, but then in that second iteration of the interpretive mode, we ask students to engage with a text or a listening, and then to respond. In a Spanish 1 classroom, the text might be in Spanish, and then we'll ask questions in English. We ask questions in English so that the language is not a barrier. We are not testing their language production skills. We want to know whether they understood. I'll share a little bit more in just a moment on interpretive, but then in interpersonal, we do 1 cycle of interpersonal where we engage students for a couple days in skeleton dialogues, maybe information gap activities, but it's structured conversation, incorporating the communicative objectives of the unit, as well as the grammatical constructs that we are targeting. And then on that 3rd day of the unit, of that interpersonal component, we are asking students to maybe record a conversation. Maybe they're engaging in a discussion board where they're actively interacting with each other. Then we move on to that presentational mode of communication, and this is a little bit more student-led in so much as on the first day, we share a rubric of what we're looking for. Students then will create a rough draft. We ask students to create the rough draft by hand so that there's no interference from translation apps or any other place like that. They're allowed to use their grammar notebooks that also includes the vocabulary. And we're looking for students to create that using their own abilities. That's important. For example, on an Apple test, there are no notes. Students are able to have some blank sheets of paper for them to be able to organize their thoughts, maybe outline their responses, but students are typing in their responses. So on that day 1, students are creating their rough drafts. On day 2, students will receive feedback, formative feedback from their teachers. And then on day 3, they're turning that text into some presentation and we allow for some degree of choice as to how students are presenting their text. That might mean that students are choosing to record their voice, or maybe students are going to create a poster, or maybe they're going, I don't know. They have the ability to choose, and we're trying to make it as fun as possible for students. This last year, for example, I had students creating a TikTok video to share their daily routine. It doesn't matter to me how they present the information in so much as we are looking at the rough drafts. We are providing students feedback on the rough drafts, which we ask students to have written inside of Google Docs, where we can engage in the formative feedback process. Students then have the ability to correct mistakes and then turn it into something fun. All right. We've talked a little bit about how we organize our units of instruction around the modes of communication. Let's dive deeper into each mode of communication and think a little bit harder around how can I prepare students for the test. First up, let's think about the interpretive mode of communication. I think it's a good idea to define what it is and what it's not. The interpretive mode of communication is understanding that gist at the novice level, the broader idea of maybe a listening or maybe a reading. At the intermediate level, maybe we're getting into details, but we're not necessarily expecting that there's 100% comprehension, especially if we're talking about authentic resources. It is a task where the purpose is listening or reading or maybe viewing. I think that's overlooked sometimes. One of our units is on art, and we love to incorporate art from across the Spanish-speaking world and ask for students then. One example activity is to provide students with an infographic of what do different colors mean. And then students are able, and of course that's in the target language, students then use that infographic to help them interpret art. And so what does the art mean? Of course, we like to use authentic materials. Another example from, I think it's our sports unit, is that one of our educators went onto Twitter and found some tweets that were talking about different sports. And so we've got a bunch of different tweets, and the students are then supposed to look in and identify whether this person likes the sport or not, for example. But the idea is that we're using context to complete the interpretation. Once more, especially at that novice level, we're not expecting for 100% comprehension. And when we think about the test specifically, and looking at our example up here of the interpretive reading, this is that Form A. It's the easier text. Form B presents students with a longer text. It's very likely that students are not going to understand every single word. Even in this example, gemelas is a lower frequency word. It means twins. But if you see that it's las hijas, you see that it's plural, and there's only one image with more than one person. So using context to be able to guess at or understand, to complete your interpretation of whatever that authentic resource might be, that listening, that reading, or that visual. We want to use context clues, such as making predictions and guessing and structures. And so you want to incorporate that into the tasks that you're engaging your students with at that unit level. Not necessarily a daily level. I like that we are focusing on a different mode of communication, targeting a different mode of communication throughout the course of a unit, that we aren't attempting to wrap everything up into one day, but rather focusing first on interpretive and then moving on to interpersonal and finally presentational. So that's what it is. It is not translation, right? I mean, give me some love here. I mean, I think that we all feel the pain in a high school classroom, even college classrooms, with kids going directly to translation. And I think that we all can relate to the idea that those translation apps don't always get it right. It's also not a hunt for trivial details. We're not trying to focus on minute ideas. We're trying to focus on the big idea, trying to understand the gist at that novice level. Maybe at the intermediate, and certainly then at the advanced, we can dive into details, but we're not trying to focus on, okay, so it says gemelas, okay, and I don't know, that's just an example. It is not reading to teach all the new vocabulary first. Readings that teach all new vocabulary first. I think that's important to say. I think there's something to be said for previewing vocabulary. I think that's important. If you're going to present your kids with an infographic, for example, that maybe we will pre-teach some of that vocabulary. But remember, it isn't the goal that students have 100% comprehension of every detail, but rather we're presenting students with authentic resources, with authentic texts, authentic listening materials, and allowing for them to interpret those texts. It's not reading, listening, or viewing without context. And we're not looking for word-to-word comprehension. Okay, so that's the interpretive mode of communication. How can we prepare students for this example experience where we're asking students to engage in that interpretive listening task? On the AAPPL test, they're going to hear, and then they're going to select from close-ended options. That might be images, or as I mentioned, it might be multiple choice responses. So they'll hear, they'll listen to different snips. As the test gets more advanced, the students are presented with multiple part experiences. So you might get the first part of a listening, and then you'll answer some questions, and then you'll get the next part, you'll answer some questions, and so on and so forth. So they build on each other. I want to share with you a few different ideas, incorporating some ed tech components of what you might do to help students prepare for this type of an experience. One is Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle is a great website. It's an ed tech tool. The majority of these are ed tech tools. This one allows you to pull videos in from YouTube and other sources, as well as upload your own videos, which I think is great. And so now we're thinking about interpretive listening, sure. And so, yes, I understand I'm presenting you with the video, but we're focused on the listening component here. So students are able to watch a video, yes, but they're listening. And then you can embed questions. So much like up here, you have a video, and then there's a question. You have an audio, and there's a question. You have an audio, and then there's a question. So here I'm able to split a video, which is also, of course, audio, multimedia. I'm able to split it as many times as I want. Edpuzzle allows you to ask student multiple choice questions, as well as open-ended questions. It doesn't have that ability for image drag and drop, but this is an example of an idea or an ed tech tool that you might use to help prepare students for that interpretive listening component on the AAPPL test. Another EdTech tool that does something very similar, where I can include a video and then add different time-stamped questions, including open-ended questions and close-ended questions, multiple choice questions, is Nearpod. Nearpod is free. There's a premium version. I should say the same thing about Edpuzzle. It's free. There is a premium version. With Edpuzzle, the free version doesn't allow you access to the student reports. And so it's a little bit more limited, although it does share to students what they get, and you might ask students to screenshot their results and turn that into you inside your learning management system, or email it to you, for example. Nearpod I find to be a bit more robust with the free version, although my teachers tell me it's a little bit harder to use in relation to adding the questions where you want them to be added. Once more, with Nearpod, you can find videos or you can upload videos. And there's a myriad of videos that are all content that's already there. That's another thing that I like about both Edpuzzle and Nearpod. You can search for content instead of having to find your own. This one's a silly video on introducing yourself. Se llama Mr. Monkey Man. His name is Mr. Monkey Man. Let's look at another one. I guess now my next examples are coming from interpretive reading. Okay, so on the interpretive reading test, students are asked to read and select images, or read and answer multiple choice questions. This is an example of an easier, a novice, probably mid or low pointed prompt. And it, yeah, I guess I say that to directly communicate to you. Of course, it gets more difficult once, especially on the form B, when we're looking at intermediate high, we're talking about paragraphs of text, or a paragraph with a question, and then students answer, they move on to the next paragraph. And so it is chunked for students well. How can I prepare my students to be successful on the interpretive reading component? One of my favorites is Charla. This is a website where you can enter a story or select a story. I know that they have a bunch of Spanish content, but I believe they have content in other languages as well. And so this is part one, where there once upon a time was a girl. Her name was Anna. She wanted new shoes. She wanted pink shoes. And now students are supposed to draw their interpretation, right? And no, there's not a drawing component here. That's true. But we're thinking, what are some interpretive tasks that we could engage students with? One of my favorites is asking students to read something and then illustrate their comprehension. So Charla allows you, and I should say this directly, this is a pay-to-play experience. I think there is a free version, but it's a more limited free version. With stories already created. I believe you can create your own, but it would allow your students to illustrate their understanding. Let's look at another example that would allow you to do the same thing for free. Nearpod. I told you Nearpod is a great tool for those interactive videos. It also allows you to create interactive presentations. There are maybe 8 or 10 different options for interactive slides. So this is wonderful if you're trying to engage in an interpretive day where you have content. And now I want a quick formative task. I want to make sure students are understanding what I'm saying. So here's a task where this comes from our curriculum. Dibujan, draw. los pantalones anaranjados con rayas amarillas y violetas. And so great, draw some pants that are orange with stripes that are yellow and purple. As I did this, I noticed that they don't have purple. So I drew some orange pants. Are those pants or shorts? I don't know. With some rayas, with some stripes. But my point is, with Nearpod, you can create your own presentations and engage students with some interpretive reading tasks that are very similar to the interpretive reading tasks that are on that AAPPL test. And then another thing I really like about it is you get, as the teacher, thumbnail images of all of the students' responses as you're doing this live, or you can also assign it as homework. And so when you think about a presentation, you think normally an interactive presentation, there's a whole bunch of content. Sure, maybe, but maybe instead you're thinking about using Nearpod for those interactive pieces. It's less about the presentation and more about engaging kids in some formative assessments to see how well they're understanding the vocabulary in context. I could have written the exact same thing. Las hijas, ellas son gemelas. And now the students have to draw two girls who are twins. Okay, let's look at another one. Nearpod, I like it a lot. It's free. There is a premium version, but the free version's awesome. Here's another one I love. This is Pear Flashcard Factory. Pear is another interactive presentation tool, but not everybody knows about Flashcard Factory. With Pear Flashcard Factory, I'm able to enter the text of a story. And I don't recall off the top of my head the entire story here, but it says, El pájaro tiene, I don't know, the dog has something. The dog is angry. A bird comes, and now a man does something. I can't read the rest of it. But the point is that students, I enter the text, and then I engage kids in with this live. Students then draw their understanding of the text, and if you so desire, you can have them translate. So this is what it looks like. Students are then put into teams, and students, so they draw. El pájaro le da muchos peces al perro. The bird gives many fish to the dog. Okay, the bird feeds the dog is how they translated that. It's a little bit different, but they understood the context. They understood it. That's great. And I see a bird coming with some fish to a dog. So the students, this is intended for students to create flashcards. I love using this for students to test their understanding of a story. At the end of it, it gets even better, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of it, you're able to push the flashcards that students created to GimKit. Pear Flashcard Factory is free. GimKit is a game platform, a game-based practice platform, which kids love, and it pushes their flashcards the students have created into its own question set that now we can practice live in class for free. GimKit has a free version. I actually pay for my teachers to have access to GimKit because the kids love it so much. That's a couple ideas. I've got a couple more. Flangoo is a great website where students, where you have access to a ton of comprehensible readers. And so comprehensible readers is the term for leveled readers. And the books, some of them are chapter books at the upper levels. Some of them aren't quite up to chapter books. But each chapter then of the book is illustrated. It has text. It will read it to students if you desire. And it comes with multiple choice questions or open-ended prompts. Flangoo as well is a tool that I pay for our teachers. Our department pays for the teachers. It is a wonderful resource of comprehensible readers. I would recommend it. Good. We've talked now about the interpretive listening and the interpretive reading. I want to think a little bit more about the interpersonal mode of communication, and a quick time check says that it's we've got about 20 minutes left together, and I want to leave time for conversation. But let's think about the interpersonal mode of communication, and I'll do this quicker. Interpersonal communication is spontaneous. It's unpredictable. It's not memorized dialogues or turn taking, talking that teacher talk. I mean, certainly we prepare students for interpersonal communication through structured activities, but it really is the use of eye contact, gestures, circumlocution. You have to negotiate meaning together. You're focusing on the message. You won't necessarily understand everything that's being said, and you have to work through that together. All right, well, this is not true interpersonal mode of communication, right? This looks more like a teacher talk, really. I mean, it's not interactive in so much as the woman or the man, whatever, the person does not take your response into account, right? It's presenting you, hello, my name is Nick Ziegler. What's your name? And then the prompt stops. Students have 7 seconds to replay the video. I always recommend that you do that. Then it will automatically start recording their response. After the students say stop recording, it moves on to the next prompt. I live in Beatrice, Nebraska. Where do you live? And then students have 7 seconds to replay the prompt, and the recording begins directly after the second viewing of the video, and so on and so forth. So how can we ask students? How can we engage students with practice activities, more performance activities than proficiency? But how can we help students prepare for this test? Char-la-la, we looked at it. I believe we saw Char-la-la up here as well, but Char-la-la is a wonderful tool that has already created dialogues for you, specifically in the Spanish classrooms. However, in other classrooms as well, is my understanding, where you get a prompt and then you record your response and then you move on. It looks almost exactly the same as that interpersonal listening and speaking, the interpersonal mode here. It is a paid premium experience. My recollection is there's a free version, but it's fairly limited. Another one is Yabla, which recently went toward an even more freemium or paid basis, but the same idea. You're presented with the video. You have different then prompts where different places where you're supposed to add your response. Let's look at some free versions, free tools that you might use. Flip used to be called Flipgrid. 4 years ago or so, Microsoft purchased Flipgrid and made it free. It is an amazing tool. I suspect a lot of us know about it. However, maybe you aren't using it in this way. You're able to have different boards, maybe, instead of having your multiple prompts organized in one interactive experience like this. Instead, you might have your multiple responses being individual prompts that students then would respond to. You can have a video prompt. This one doesn't. This is what we did at the beginning of the year last year. Actually, we did it this year as well, where we're asking students to record themselves, introducing themselves. I cut off the kid's head, of course, for privacy purposes, but it's a wonderful tool to engage kids in a mock interpersonal experience. Another example might be using your learning management system. You inside of Canvas anyway, you're able to have a video discussion where I can record the prompt and now the students can reply. I look a little angry in there, don't I? I'm not angry, I promise. But your learning management system might be a place where you could organize video prompts similar to how students are going to experience that AAPPL test. We've got one more test component to look at before we're done here, ladies and gentlemen. Last up, and we've got about, I want to talk for 9 more minutes. So, and then open up last 5 minutes for conversation, please. So please do add questions, comments in the chat as we're going up. We'll have some time for that. Last up is presentational mode of communication. Very briefly, the presentational is practiced, rehearsed. This is different from the interpersonal mode of communication, which is spontaneous. The presentational mode of communication includes an awareness of the audience. For what purpose am I creating this? You are able to use a dictionary. We want you to use what you've got. We want you to create a polished product. As part of our units of instruction, please remember that presentational product, in the first day, kids create their rough drafts. In the second day, we provide them feedback. And now in the third day, they're creating something that's cool and fun. Here, we're not negotiating meaning. It's not unplanned. And we're not relying necessarily on circumlocution, although I would say we don't want to use translation apps, of course. We want to encourage students to use what they're able to use. I mean, it's on the test, students are not going to have access to a dictionary. Students are not going to have access to translation apps. They want no other tab open. And as the proctor of the test, you are to ensure that that is true. You don't know what the prompts are prior to the experience. So how can I prepare my students for this? And I don't really necessarily have a whole bunch of like ed tech tools for this idea. I think that it's more important that we focus on things like the AP themes. This is a direct link to a blog if you want more information about it. And so I should give credit where credit is due. I did not create that image. The same is true of this, but here are the AAPPL tests. This is a screenshot from the AAPPL's website. And so what are potential topics students might be asked to address? And they're very similar to those core AP themes of beauty and aesthetics, contemporary life, science, technology, family and communities, global challenges, and personal and public identities. And so if you were to categorize these ideas into these things, they would fit wonderfully. This is a great blog post that talks in greater depth about what kinds of prompts you might provide to kids. But I think it's important that we think about it both in terms of what would be a product in your classroom to accomplish your unit's communicative objectives, but then also potentially there's pop-up experience where it's a think and write, where you do give students at the beginning of as a bell ringer, you give kids 5 minutes, present them a topic. And you don't necessarily want to do this every single day. I wouldn't want to do this in my interpretive mode, but maybe you take a day before you move from interpersonal to presentational, and you do ask students to do a think and write experience. Present kids with the prompt, give them 5 minutes. We like to then count how many words students produced. The real point is that we need kids to practice writing so that they are prepared. If we come back to our example of what it looks like, that they are prepared to provide a paragraph, not a sentence. I mean, we want kids to show on that AAPPL test what they're capable of. And we want to encourage the use of like high frequency conjunctions or transition words. We want to help students incorporate those conjunctions, those relative clauses into their writing. Ordinal phrases and so on and so forth. In our grammar notebooks, we include a glossary of those types of ordinal phrases or even fillers. I think filler words, like in the Spanish language, pues, or entonces, or así que, or I mean, those types of things are important so that when students are engaging in that interpersonal speaking component, that when they are presented a prompt and they say what they want to say, and then they're kind of looking, they're in between another idea, they have something to say, even if it's one of those filler words. And I would note that the use of even filler words does suggest that kids have a higher level of proficiency. The same is true with that presentational writing piece. We want to encourage, we want to equip students with structures like más que, more than, less than, as much as. Those are the types of things that you're likely to see when you're giving an opinion about this, that, or the other theme. I might say, I like basketball more than baseball because, but give it the full sentence. Encourage students to create those longer sentences, and to do so, we need to equip them with those conjunctions. And so those are my tips. I don't necessarily, again, have like specific prompts that I would ask you to use to prepare kids to do this. But here again, you can see, here are the types of things that will be asked about. Good. I have a little bit more time. I want to just quick go through some more resources. These are not mine. These are wonderful resources from across the web. And so I'll just open them up real quick. Here is Lang Media. And so a bunch of different languages. I'll just click on Spanish, and now I'll look at Spanish in Ecuador. I haven't looked at one of these. I don't know, at the airport. And then it looks like we only have images from that one. So that was a bad example, but maybe this will be a better one. And so then it's giving you videos as well as transcripts of people and native speakers. So this might be a place where you could pull from to find some of those authentic videos. Here's another one. This is Spin Text. And so this, I've already looked at Spanish, or this one might only be Spanish, but here are some authentic videos where I don't know, I can look at La Cultura, and so the culture, and now it presents me with a bunch of different videos. It also has the transcript. It even includes some vocabulary that you might want to be able to see. It identifies the grammar concepts that are included. And so another great website that you might want to look at specifically in a Spanish classroom. Here's another one specific to Spanish. Sorry for my Chinese friends here, but this is language proficiency exercises that are organized by beginning, intermediate, lower, and higher. And so if we look at negotiate a taxi ride again, I feel like we just did that one, didn't we? But here's a video of a person actually talking about negotiating a taxi ride.
Ok, por ejemplo, si vas a negociar una carrera, como le llamamos aquí, una carrera de aquí al centro, por ejemplo, si la carrera cuesta 1.500 bolívares.
The transcript in Spanish and in English. And so another great spot for you to find some authentic videos that could be incorporated. Here's some more for more of that listening. And I'm sorry if my examples are Spanish specific, but that's my context. And so if I look at, I don't know, daily scenes, And now I can pull up, let's look at the return to college. And I have an audio. It's audio only, but then it comes with the text. It comes with potential exercises and allows for the world to provide some comments. Here's another one. Here is Acceso. And as we see here, I can go to different places around the world. Let's go to Mexico, un paso más, perspectivas, voces. I don't know. Let's go to, fine. But you open it up and we can look at baseball. And in here, these are readings. This is multimedia, but it's great readings. These are more maybe intermediate level. A tool that I don't have listed right here is Newsela. That's another tool. When you open it up, you're able to find text both in English and in Spanish. I don't know about other languages. Another website that you might want to peruse. This is an older website. It's an older Google site that someone created, but wow, there are a bunch of different resources on there that I typically, I will go to and try to find. Vocaroo is a great place if you're looking to be able to record audio, for example, but lots of different ideas on that website as well. We're wrapping it up, ladies and gentlemen. Today we talked about what is the Apple assessment of proficiency. We talked about why would you want to do this with your kids, with an eye really certainly on what's best for your kids, but also what's best for your program. We looked at it from the student perspective, that interface of the Apple test. We talked about what it looks like from the teacher perspective, both in terms of how to get kids registered and also how to look at the data that's prepared or provided. And then we focused a good half of our talk on how to prepare students for the Apple test. I'll leave this up here, and I think we're ready, Crystal, to open it up for conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nick Ziegler, for the awesome presentation. Very informative, and I really enjoy seeing how you have done. I mean, you and your teachers have done to prepare students. That's the most important part for a lot of teachers, right? Okay, our participants, please unmute yourself if you have questions, and we can have a discussion here. Any questions?
Well, it's my understanding that the recording will be posted, and certainly you have on the presentation, you have access to my email. And should you so desire, you are welcome to reach out to me with any questions that way.
Yeah, it seems we do not have any questions. And I think it's time for us to enjoy the rest of the day. Yeah. Thank you for participating. Thank you, Dr. Nick Ziegler.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you
Yeah.
all.
And the recording
Yes.
will be posted on NDE websites within a week. Thank you.
Thank you.